If you have these 7 duality powers, you don't even need protection from dark forces. There's something most people don't understand about spiritual power. True power, real, untouchable, unshakable inner strength doesn't come from how much light you project. It comes from how deeply you've integrated your darkness. We've been conditioned to believe that the path to spiritual mastery is all about protecting ourselves from negative energy, shielding ourselves from dark forces, constantly clearing our field, wearing crystals, chanting mantras, and surrounding ourselves with artificial light. But here's the truth nobody tells you. If you activate the 7 duality powers that already exist within you, you won't need any of that. Because when you become whole, when you stop choosing sides in the war between light and dark, you become a frequency that cannot be touched. Not because you're protected, but because you're complete. We've been taught to fear darkness, to run from it, to fight it. But what if I told you darkness is not the enemy? What if I told you darkness is the missing piece in your spiritual evolution? The part of you that holds your rage, your primal truth, your ancient memory. The part that doesn't obey, but remembers. The part of you that doesn't ask for permission to exist, but simply is. That's the part most spiritual people exile. And that's why they still feel vulnerable, still feel like they need protection, still get drained around certain people or places, because they're trying to live in the light, but they've abandoned half of their own power.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
You can't defeat darkness by avoiding it. You defeat it by integrating your own. That's where the duality powers come in. These aren't gifts you're given. These are codes you activate when you stop trying to be pure and start trying to be real. And when these 7 powers come online, something radical happens. You stop vibrating at a frequency that attracts attacks. You stop leaking energy. You stop being prey. Because you're no longer just radiating light, you're radiating balance. That balance sends a signal into the spiritual field. This one is complete. This one cannot be manipulated. This one has nothing left to hide. Let me ask you something that goes deeper than surface level spirituality. Do you actually want to be protected, or do you want to be undefeatable? Because protection is temporary. It's armor. It can be cracked. But wholeness is eternal. When you master both poles of your energy, your light and your shadow, you become like the Tao, like the yin and yang symbol. You hold both the sword and the open hand. You know when to speak and when to remain silent. You know when to surrender and when to strike. And dark forces, they don't know what to do with that. They only know how to manipulate the fragmented. The ones pretending to be something they're not. The ones chasing purity while secretly repressing their anger, their trauma, their power. So let me tell you what the first duality power is. It's the power of sacred rage. Most people think rage is toxic, dangerous, unspiritual. But let me tell you something, the most powerful beings I've ever met didn't erase their rage, they channeled it. They turned it into boundaries, into clarity, into truth. Rage is the fire that burns away illusions. It's not destructive when it's conscious. It's surgical. It cuts through manipulation. It says, no more. It says, I remember who I am. And when you own your sacred rage, no entity, no psychic attack, no energy vampire can enter your field. Because your field is no longer passive. It's alive. It's awake. It's full of fire. The second duality power is the power of deep stillness. Sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Rage and stillness. But that's the point. Duality is not contradiction, it's completion. Stillness is not the absence of action. It's the presence of sovereignty. It's the ability to sit in your energy without reaching for distraction, validation, or escape. It's the ability to feel chaos all around you and remain unmoved. Stillness is the eye of the storm. And when you activate this frequency, dark forces can't find a way in, because there's no opening, no panic, no fear, just presence. Have you ever noticed how silence can be more powerful than screaming? That's stillness. It's not emptiness, it's anchored awareness. And most people skip this discipline. They meditate to escape the noise, not to enter the void. But the void is where your real power lies. When you can sit with yourself in total silence, in total discomfort, and not flinch, that's when your spiritual field becomes fortress level strong. The third duality power is the power of knowing without proof, intuition, but not the soft, safe kind. I'm talking about radical inner knowing, the kind that makes no sense but won't go away. The kind that tells you to leave a room, cut a tie, speak a truth, even when your mind is screaming don't. This power comes from integrating your inner feminine and inner masculine, your logic and your feeling, your intellect and your instinct. When they work together, you stop second-guessing, and that makes you spiritually lethal. Because hesitation is what dark forces feed on. But when you know, when you move with precision and trust, you become a sovereign node in the spiritual grid. You become unpredictable, uncontrollable, unbreakable. So here's the question I want you to take seriously. What parts of you have you been trying to heal that are actually the source of your power? Because that's what the dark forces fear the most, not your light, but your wholeness. Your refusal to abandon any part of yourself. Your willingness to turn your scars into weapons of clarity. Your ability to walk into darkness and not lose yourself in it, but find yourself through it. These three duality powers, sacred rage, deep stillness, and knowing without proof, are just the beginning. They're the foundation of a new kind of spirituality. Not the kind that hides from darkness, but the kind that transcends it by integrating it fully. And when you live from this place, you don't just protect yourself from dark forces. You transmute them. You become the mirror that reflects their illusions back to them. You become the presence that makes them dissolve without effort, because you're not fighting them anymore. You're operating on a different frequency altogether, and that frequency is wholeness. You're not supposed to be pure, the four remaining duality powers that make you spiritually untouchable. We were never meant to be pure. That's the illusion. That's the trap. Somewhere along the way, we began to confuse spiritual evolution with sterilization, as if becoming a higher being meant cutting away all our complexity, all our contradictions, all our chaos. But the truth is, purity is brittle. It cracks under pressure. It shatters when touched by real life. What makes you untouchable is not how pure you are, it's how integrated you are. And that's what the final four duality powers reveal. They don't ask you to be perfect. They ask you to be whole, to carry your darkness like a sword and your light like a flame in the same hand. The fourth duality power is the power of controlled chaos. Let that one land, because chaos in its raw form can destroy. But when you own your chaos, when you learn how to wield it, it becomes one of the most powerful forces in your spiritual arsenal. Think about it. The universe itself was born from chaos. Every creation begins in disorder. Every transformation is preceded by a breakdown. So why do we fear our own inner chaos? Why do we label it as weakness, instability, or madness? Controlled chaos is the ability to ride the storm without becoming the storm. It's the skill of letting your emotions erupt, but not letting them hijack your truth. It's dancing with your shadow without getting swallowed by it. When you master this, you don't avoid breakdowns, you alchemize them. You use them to tear down the illusions, destroy the false identities, and burn away what no longer serves. Dark forces thrive in suppressed chaos. But when you bring it into the light, when you claim it, shape it, and move it with awareness, they lose their grip. Because now you're using the same energy they use, but you're using it with consciousness. That's power. The fifth duality power is the power of sacred humor. And most people underestimate this one. But listen closely. The moment you can laugh, Even in the middle of your pain, even in the presence of darkness, you become unbreakable. Because humor is not denial, it's transcendence. It's the soul recognizing that nothing is ever final, that no shadow is permanent, that even in the darkest moments there is still you, the observer, the witness, the eternal spark. Sacred humor is the ability to hold paradox, to say, yes, this is hard and also hilarious. To look at your own ego and say, wow, look at this character I'm playing. That level of detachment doesn't weaken your presence, it strengthens it. Those who can laugh at darkness are the ones who've already faced it and survived. They've gone to the edge and returned with their soul intact. And that's terrifying to dark forces because they feed on fear. But humor breaks the spell. It disarms the illusion. It reminds you that you are not the pain, you are the one experiencing it. That's a level of spiritual immunity no ritual can give you. The sixth duality power is the power of erotic energy. And let's be clear, we're not just talking about sex. Erotic energy is life force. It's the sacred current that moves through your body when you're fully alive. It's the pulse of creativity, desire, intuition, embodiment. It's what makes you magnetic, vibrant, dangerous in the best way. But most people suppress it. They compartmentalize it. They're scared of how powerful it feels to be fully turned on by life. But when you activate this energy consciously, not just for pleasure, but for presence, you awaken a force that dark entities can't touch. Why? Because erotic energy is rooted in the body, and the body is where your deepest knowing lives. The more you inhabit your body, the harder it becomes to control you, because you're no longer floating in your head, susceptible to fear programs. You're anchored, awake, fully here. And when you channel erotic energy into your voice, your art, your movement, your choices, you become a living frequency of creative chaos. You become untamable, and darkness doesn't know how to deal with that. Now we arrive at the seventh and final duality power, the one that ties it all together. The power of compassionate ferocity. This is not softness. This is not martyrdom. This is the lioness who guards her cubs, the warrior who fights not for ego but for truth. It's the ability to open your heart and hold a sword, to forgive and hold a boundary, to say, I love you, and I will not tolerate this. Compassionate ferocity is the ultimate power because it doesn't come from fear, it comes from devotion. Devotion to what's real. Devotion to your own soul. Devotion to protecting the sacred, even if it means being misunderstood. When you activate this, you become a spiritual guardian, not just for yourself, but for others. You become the kind of presence that shifts rooms without speaking. That protects not by fighting, but by embodying truth so fully that lies dissolve in your presence. That's the power dark forces can't imitate, because it's not performative. It's earned through shadow, through fire, through every moment you chose to stay awake when it would have been easier to go numb. So here we are, 7 duality powers: sacred rage, deep stillness, knowing without proof, controlled chaos, sacred humor, erotic energy, compassionate ferocity. These are not traits. They are states of being you activate when you stop trying to be only light and start becoming whole. They are the reason you don't need protection, because you are no longer vibrating at the frequency of prey. You are now the embodiment of your own spiritual ecosystem. And if that makes you feel powerful, it should, because you are. The dangerous ones are the whole ones. How duality makes you unreadable, unbreakable, and spiritually unmessable. There's a reason the most dangerous beings in the highest spiritual sense are never the loudest in the room. They don't need to shout. They don't need to prove. They don't even need to defend themselves, because their energy communicates a single, silent truth: I am whole. I am not playing sides. I am the storm and the stillness. When you embody duality, When you've integrated both your creative light and your primal darkness, you become unreadable to dark forces. They can't decode you. They can't predict you. They can't manipulate your frequency because it no longer has fractures. You are no longer running from yourself. And when you're not running, you're not leaking. And when you're not leaking, you're sovereign. That's what makes you unbreakable. Not shields, not spells, not rituals, but completion. Let's get real. Most people on the spiritual path are still trying to edit themselves into something consumable. They want to seem high vibe, pure, positive, like they've transcended the mess. But that's not mastery. That's spiritual theater. The truly evolved don't transcend the mess, they merge with it. They sit in the mud and remember that God is there too. They cry and scream and bleed and pray in the same breath. They don't choose light over dark or dark over light, they choose truth. No matter how inconvenient, how non-aesthetic, how raw. And that's what makes them dangerous. You can't manipulate someone who is no longer afraid of their own darkness. Have you ever noticed that the most magnetic people are not necessarily the happiest? They're the most honest. There's something in the way they walk, speak, exist that tells you this person has met their shadow and lived to tell the story. That's the energy that stops dark forces in their tracks, not because it's aggressive, but because it's unreadable. It doesn't follow the script. It's not polarized. It doesn't play the victim or the villain. It just is. And in the spiritual realm, just being is the most advanced state you can reach. It's the end game. Let me ask you something you may not be ready to answer. Are you still trying to be good, or are you ready to be whole? Because good is subjective. It shifts depending on culture, conditioning, and control systems. But wholeness is eternal. It includes your wildness, your lust, your grief, your silence, your rage, your joy, your intuition, your logic, your inner child, your ancient warrior. And when all those parts sit at the same table, something miraculous happens. You stop being a target. Because what dark energy preys on most is fragmentation. It's the part of you that you've disowned. The part you still feel shame about. The part you keep hidden behind spiritual language and sacred symbols. But when you bring that part home, when you say, yes, even this belongs, you close the gap. You collapse the fracture. And that's when your frequency becomes unmessable. Not because it's perfect, but because it's coherent. It's a full chord, not a broken note. And dark forces don't know what to do with that. They're programmed to exploit imbalance. But when you're balanced within, they bounce off. This doesn't mean you'll never be tested. On the contrary, duality invites deeper initiations. But the difference is you no longer respond with panic. You respond with presence. You've seen your own darkness. You felt your own death and rebirth. You faced rejection, betrayal, ego death, and spiritual disillusionment, and you're still here. Stronger, softer, sharper, more you than ever. And that's what makes you unbreakable. You begin to notice that your power isn't in how much you can control your environment, it's in how little your environment can control you. You can walk into a room full of chaotic energy and remain centered. You can feel a projection and not take it personally. You can sense a dark agenda and simply observe without reacting, without needing to push it away. That's the level where you stop being a spiritual reactor and become a spiritual generator. You set the field. And here's a secret most people will never understand. The more whole you become, the less you need to speak about it. Your energy will do the talking. Your presence will do the protection. Your choices, no longer driven by fear or performance, will act as spells that shape reality. And the people around you? They'll either rise to meet you or fall away. Not because you pushed them, but because your frequency became an amplifier. And anything that isn't coherent with your truth will naturally dissolve. That's not ego. That's energetic law. So if you've ever felt like you're too much, too intense, too emotional, too dark, too sensitive. Maybe you were never too much. Maybe you were just too whole for a world that thrives on fragmentation. And maybe your job was never to dim it down, but to own it fully, so fully that you become a mirror for others to see their own disowned parts. That's what it means to be spiritually dangerous, not to dominate, not to control, but to illuminate a level of integration so rare, so real, so raw, that it cracks open everyone who comes near you, not through force, but through frequency. You don't need to fight dark energy when you are no longer afraid of it. You don't need to shield yourself when you are no longer leaking. You don't need protection when you are the integration point between the seen and unseen, the light and the dark, the human and the divine. You are the bridge, and bridges don't break, they connect. The final frequency, why wholeness, is the ultimate protection, manifestation, and revolution. The greatest lie ever told in the spiritual world is that you need to add something to yourself to become powerful, more light, more love, more protection, more purity. But the truth is radical and uncomfortable. You don't need to add anything. You need to remember everything. Everything you already are. Everything you've exiled. Everything you've tried to fix, hide, or purify. Because what you're looking for isn't outside of you. It's buried beneath the masks you wear to feel safe in a world that fears the whole human. Wholeness is not a concept. It's a frequency. And once you tune into it, you don't just protect yourself, you become the field of protection. You don't just manifest what you want, you collapse the illusion of separation between you and it. You don't just survive the spiritual war, you transcend it. Because wholeness is the final frequency, the one that ends the game, the one that makes you spiritually unhackable, energetically sovereign, undeniably magnetic, irreversibly free. Let's be clear, wholeness isn't about being healed. It's about being honest. It's about standing in the full spectrum of your being and saying, yes, I am all of this. The light, the dark, the sacred, the profane, the divine child and the ancient warrior, the lover and the destroyer, the silence and the scream. And when you do that, when you let every part of you breathe without judgment, something sacred happens. Your energy becomes undeniably real, and in a world full of illusions, real is revolutionary. Have you ever noticed how the most magnetic people aren't trying to impress anyone? They're not trying to be liked. They're not trying to be understood. They're just being. Fully. Coherently. And that coherence is what draws everything to them, not because they're trying to manifest, but because they've collapsed the inner war. There's no more resistance, no more fragmentation, no more frequency leaks. And when you're not leaking, you're creating constantly, effortlessly. You become the field itself. This is the paradox of true spiritual power. The less you try to protect yourself, the more impervious you become. Because protection implies fear, it implies separation, it implies vulnerability. But wholeness implies presence, alignment, an embodied knowing that nothing can enter your field unless it has something to teach you or something to be transmuted by your frequency. That's not arrogance. That's energetic law. You become less of a target not because you've hidden away, but because you've expanded so far into your full self that there's no longer a doorway for distortion to enter. And manifestation. You stop chasing it because you realize that the highest form of manifestation doesn't come from vision boards or affirmations. It comes from congruence. When every part of you is aligned, the universe doesn't have to guess what you want. You are the signal. You're not asking, you're broadcasting. And life responds, not because you're special, but because you're clear, aligned, whole. Let me ask you something that could change everything. What if the version of you you've been trying to become is actually the version of you you've been trying to avoid? Because the higher self isn't a sanitized, perfect, enlightened being. It's the most honest version of you. The version that doesn't hide. The version that doesn't split itself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. The version that holds space for every contradiction inside you and says, yes, even this is God. And that's the revolution. That's the protection. That's the manifestation. To be so deeply, unapologetically yourself that you become unshakable. To stop filtering your truth to make others comfortable. To stop shrinking your power to be understood. To stop outsourcing your safety to rituals, gurus, or systems that keep you dependent. Because you are the system. You are the ritual. You are the force. And when you remember that fully, fiercely, finally there's nothing left to fear. Not even darkness. Because you're not standing in opposition to it anymore. You're standing above it. You are the light and the shadow, the question and the answer, the chaos and the calm. You are the final frequency. And once you remember that, you don't need protection from dark forces. You are the force.